Why I am so clever. Why do I know more things than other people? Why, in fact, am I so clever? I have never pondered over questions that are not questions. I have never squandered my strength. Of actual religious difficulties, for instance, I have no experience. I have never known what it is to feel sinful. In the same way, I completely lack any reliable criterion for ascertaining what constitutes a prick of conscience. From all accounts, a prick of conscience does not seem to be a very estimable thing. Once it was done, I should hate to leave an action of mine in the lurch. I should prefer completely to omit the evil outcome, the consequences from the problem concerning the value of an action. In the face of evil consequences, one is too ready to lose the proper standpoint from which one's deed ought to be considered. A prick of conscience strikes me as a sort of evil eye. Something that has failed should be honored all the more jealously, precisely because it has failed. This is much more in keeping with my morality. God, the immortality of the soul, salvation, a beyond. To all these notions, even as a child, I never paid any attention whatsoever, nor did I waste any time upon them. Maybe I was never knave enough for that. I am quite unacquainted with atheism as a result, and still less as an event in my life. In me, it is inborn, instinctive. I am too inquisitive, too incredulous, too high-spirited to be satisfied with such a palpably clumsy solution of things. God is a too palpably clumsy solution of things. A solution which shows a lack of delicacy towards us thinkers. At bottom, he is really no more than a coarse and rude prohibition of us. Ye shall not think. I am much more interested in another question, a question upon which the salvation of humanity depends to a far greater degree than it does upon any piece of theological curiosity. I refer to nutrition. For ordinary purposes, it may be formulated as follows. How precisely must thou feed thyself in order to attain to thy maximum of power, or virtue in the Renaissance style, of virtue free from moralic acid? My experiences in regard to this matter have been as bad as they possibly could be. I am surprised that I set myself this question so late in life, that it took me so long to draw rational conclusions from my experiences. Only the absolute worth I, Lessless, of German culture, its idealism, can to some extent explain how it was that precisely in this matter I was so backward that my ignorance was almost saintly. This culture in quotes, which from the first to the last teaches one to lose sight of actual things and to hunt after thoroughly problematic and so-called ideal aims, as, for instance, classical culture, as if it were not hopeless from the start to try to unite classical and German in one concept. It is even a little comical. Excuse me. Try and imagine a classically cultured citizen of Leipzig. Indeed, I can say that up to a very mature age, my food was entirely bad. Expressed morally, it was impersonal, selfless, altruistic, to the glory of cooks and all other fellow Christians. It was through the cooking in vogue at Leipzig, for instance, together with my first study of Schopenhauer, 1865, that I earnestly renounced my, quote, will to live, end quote. To spoil one's stomach by absorbing insufficient nourishment. This problem seemed to my mind solved with admirable felicity by the above-mentioned cookery. It is said that in the year 1866, changes were introduced into this department. But as to German cookery in general, what has it not got on its conscience? But as to German cookery in general, what has it not got on its conscience? Soup before the meal, and then in brackets it says, still called alla tedesca in the Venetian cookery books of the 16th century, end bracket. Okay, so soup before a meal, meat boiled to shreds, vegetables cooked with fat and flour, the degeneration of pastries into paperweights, and if you add thereto the absolutely bestial post-Pandial drinking habits of the ancients, and not alone of the ancient Germans, you will understand where German intellect took its origin, that is to say, in sadly disordered intestines. German intellect is indigestion. It can assimilate nothing. But even English diet, which, in comparison with German, and indeed with French, elimination, seems to me to constitute a return to nature, quotes, like return to nature in quotes. So seems to me to constitute a return to nature, that is, to cannibalism, is profoundly opposed to my own instincts. It seems to me to give the intellect heavy feet. In fact, English woman's feet. The best cooking is that of Piedmont. That's spelled Piedmont. Alcoholic drinks do not agree with me. A single glass of wine or beer a day is amply sufficient to turn life into a valley of tears for me. In Munich live my antipodes, although I admit that this knowledge came to me somewhat late. It already formed part of my conscious experience, even as a child. As a boy, I believed that drinking of the wine and smoking of tobacco were at first but the vanities of youth, and later merely bad habits. Maybe the poor wine of Naumburg was partly responsible for this poor opinion of wine in general. In order to believe that wine was exhilarating, I should have had to be a Christian. In other words, I would have had to believe in what, to my mind, is an absurdity. Strange to say, whereas small quantities of alcohol, taken with plenty of water, succeed in making me feel out of sorts, large quantities turn me into a rollicking tar. Even as a boy, I showed my bravado in this respect. To compose a long Latin essay in one night, to revive and recopy it, to aspire with my pen to emulating the exactitude and the terseness of my model, Sallust, and to pour a few very strong grogs over it. All this mode of procedure while I was a pupil at the venerable old school of Forte, P-F-O-R-T-A, was not in the least out of keeping with my physiology. Was not in the least out of keeping with my physiology, nor perhaps that of Sallust. However much it may have been alien to dignified Forte. Later on, towards the middle of my life, I grew more and more opposed to alcoholic drinks. I, an opponent of vegetarianism, who have experienced what vegetarianism is, just as Wagner, who converted me back to meat, experienced it, cannot with sufficient earnestness advise all more spiritual natures to abstain absolutely from alcohol. Water answers the purpose. I have a predilection in favor of those places where in all directions one has opportunities of drinking from running brooks. In vino veritas, it seems that here, once more, I am at variance with the rest of the world about the concept, truth, capital T, in quotes. With me, spirit moves on the face of the waters. Here, a few more indications as to my morality. A heavy meal is digested more easily than an inadequate one. A heavy meal is digested more easily than an inadequate one. The first principle of a good digestion is that the stomach should become active as a whole. A man ought therefore to know the size of his stomach. For the same reasons, all those interminable meals, which I call interrupted sacrificial feasts, and which are to be had at any table d'hôte of the hotel, are strongly to be deprecated. Nothing should be eaten between meals. Coffee should be given up. Coffee makes one gloomy. Tea is beneficial only in the morning, should be taken in small quantities but very strong. It may be very harmful and indispose you for the whole day if it be taken the least bit too weak. Everybody has his own standard on this matter, often between the narrowest and the most delicate limits. In an enervating climate, tea is not a good beverage with which to start the day. An hour before taking it, an excellent thing to drink is a cup of thick cocoa. Feed from oil. Remain seated as little as possible. Put no trust in any thought that is not born in the open to the accompaniment of free bodily motion, nor in one in which even the muscles do not celebrate a feast. All prejudices take their origin in the intestines. A sedentary life, as I have already said elsewhere, is the real sin against the Holy Spirit. And this is part 2 now. To the question of nutrition, that of locality and climate is next of kin. Nobody is so constituted as to be able to live everywhere and anywhere, and he who has great duties to perform, which lay claim to all his strength, has in this respect a very limited choice. The influence of climate upon the bodily functions, affecting their acceleration or retardation, extends so far that a blunder in the choice of locality and climate is not only is able not only to alienate a man from his actual duty, but also to withhold it from him altogether, so that he never even comes face to face with it. Animal vigor never acquires enough strength in him in order to reach that pitch of artistic freedom which makes his own soul whisper to him, I alone can do that. Even so slight a tendency as laziness in the intestines, once it has become a habit, is quite sufficient to make something mediocre, something German in quotes, out of genius. The climate of Germany alone is enough to discourage the strongest and most heroically disposed intestines. The tempo of the body's functions is loosely bound up with the agility or the clumsiness of the spirit's feet. Spirit itself is indeed only a form of these organic functions. Let anybody make a list of the places in which men of great intellect have been found and are still found, where wit, subtlety, and malice constitute happiness, where genius is almost necessarily at home. All of them rejoice in exceptionally dry air. Paris, Provence, Florence, Jerusalem, Athens. These names prove something, namely that genius is conditioned by dry air, by a pure sky, that is to say, by rapid organic functions, by the constant and ever-present possibility of procuring one's great self, and even enormous quantities of strength. I have a certain case in mind in which a man of remarkable intellect and independent spirit became a narrow, craven specialist and a grumpy old crank, simply owing to the lack of subtlety in his instinct for climate. And I myself might have been an example of the same thing if illness had not compelled me to reason and to reflect upon reason realistically. Now that I have learned through long practice to read the effects of climate and meteorological influences from my own body as though from a delicate and reliable instrument, and that I am able to calculate the change in degrees of atmospheric moisture by means of physiological observations upon myself, even on so short a journey as that from Turin to Milan, I think with horror of the ghastly fact that my whole life, until the last 10 years, the most perilous years, has always been spent in the wrong and to what, to me, ought to have been most forbidden places. Naumburg, Forta, Thuringia, in general, Leipzig, Bâle, Venice, so many ill-starred places for a constitution like mine. If I cannot recall one single happy reminiscence of my childhood and youth, it is nonsense to suppose that so-called moral in quotes, causes could account for this, as for instance the incontestable fact that I lacked companions that could have satisfied me. For this fact is the same today as it ever was, and it does not prevent me from being cheerful and brave. But it was ignorance in the physiological matters that confounded idealism. That was the real curse of my life. This was a superfluous and foolish element in my existence, something from which nothing could spring, and for which there could be no settlement and no compensation. As the outcome of this idealism, I regarded all the blunders, the great aberrations of instinct, and the modest specializations which drew me aside from the task of my life, as for instance, the fact that I became a philologist. Why not at least a medical man, or anything else which might have opened my eyes? My days at Bâle or Bale, B-A-L-E, with a circumflex over the A. My days at Bale, the whole of my intellectual routine, including my daily timetable, was an absolutely senseless abuse of extraordinary powers, without the slightest compensation for the strength that I spent, without even a thought of what I was squandering and how its place might be filled. I lacked all the subtlety and egotism, all the fostering care of an imperative instinct. I was in a state in which one is ready to regard oneself as anybody's equal, a state of disinterestedness, a forgetting of one's distance from others, something, in short, for which I can never forgive myself. When I had well nigh reached the end of my tether, simply because I had almost reached my end, I began to reflect upon the fundamental absurdity of my life. Idealism, in quotes, idealism. It was illness that first brought me to reason. Part 3. After the choice of nutrition, the choice of climate and locality, the third matter concerning which one must not on any account make a blunder is the choice of the manner in which one recuperates one's strength. Here again, according to the extent to which a spirit is sui generis, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I'm going to spell this for you. S-U-I-G-E-N-E-R-I-S. Okay, here again, according to the extent to which spirit is sui generis, the limits of that which he can allow himself, in other words, the limits of that which is beneficial to him, become more and more confined. As far as I, in particular, am concerned, reading in general belongs to my means of recuperation. Consequently, it belongs to that which rids me of myself, to that which enables me to wander in strange sciences and strange souls, to that, in fact, about which I am no longer in earnest. Indeed, it is while reading that I recover from my earnestness. During the time that I am deeply absorbed in my work, no books are found within my reach. It would never occur to me to allow anyone to speak or even think in my presence. For that is what reading would mean. Has anyone ever actually noticed that during the period of profound tension to which the state of pregnancy condemns not only the mind, but also at bottom the whole organism, accident and every kind of external stimulus acts too acutely and strikes too deeply? Accident and external stimuli must, as far as possible, be avoided. A sort of walling of oneself, in is one of the primary instinctive precautions of spiritual pregnancy. Shall I allow a strange thought to steal secretly over the wall? For that is what reading would mean. The periods of work and fruitfulness are followed by periods of recuperation. Come hither, ye delightful, intellectual, intelligent books. Shall I read German books? I must go back 6 months to catch myself with a book in my hand. What was it? An excellent study by Victor Brochard upon the Greek skeptics, in which my Laertiana, Laertiana, was used to advantage. The skeptics, the only honorable types among the double-faced and sometimes quintuple-faced throng, the philosophers. Otherwise, I almost always take refuge in the same books. Altogether, their number is small. They are books which are precisely my proper fare. It is not perhaps in my nature to read much, and of all sorts. A library makes me ill. Neither is it my nature to love much, or many kinds of things. Suspicion, or even hostility, towards new books is much more akin to my instinctive feeling that toleration, largeur de cœur, and other forms of neighbor love, it is to a small number of old French authors that I will always return again and again. I believe only in French culture and regard anything else in Europe which calls itself culture as a misunderstanding. I do not even take the German kind into consideration. The few instances of higher culture with which I have met in Germany were all French in their origin. The most striking example of this was Madame Cosima Wagner, by far the most decisive voice in matters of taste that I have ever heard. If I do not read but literally love Pascal as the most instinctive sacrifice to Christianity, killing himself inch by inch, first bodily, then spiritually, according to the terrible consistency. Oh, my goodness. Let me start the sentence again. As the most instinctive sacrifice to Christianity, killing himself inch by inch, first bodily, then spiritually, according to the terrible consistency of this most appalling form of inhuman cruelty. If I have something of Montaigne's mischievousness in my soul, and who knows, perhaps also in my body, if my artist's taste endeavors to defend the genius of Shakespeare, all this, no. If my artist's taste endeavors to defend the names of Molière, Corneille, and Racine, and not without bitterness against a wild genius such as Shakespeare, all this does not prevent me from regarding even the latter-day Frenchmen, also as charming companions. I can think of absolutely no century in history in which a netful of more inquisitive and at the same time more subtle psychologists could be drawn together than in Paris of the present day. Let me mention a few at random, for their number is by no means small. Paul Bourget, Bourget, Pierre Loti, Loti, Gyp, Gyp, Meihac, I don't know how to say this, Meihac, Anatole France, Jules Lemaitre, Lemaitre, or, to point to one of strong race, a genuine Latin, of whom I am particularly fond, Guy de Maupassant. Between ourselves, I prefer this generation even to its masters, all of whom were corrupted by German philosophy. And then it says in brackets, Taine, Taine, for instance, by Hegel, whom he has to thank for his misunderstanding of great men and great periods. End bracket. Whenever Germany extends her sway She ruins culture. It was the war which first saved the spirit of France. Stendhal is one of the happiest accidents of my life. Stendhal. Stendhal is one of the happiest accidents of my life. For everywhere that marks an epoch in it, it has been brought to me by accident and never by means of recommendation. He is quite priceless, with his psychologist's eye, quick at forestalling and anticipating, with his grasp of facts, which is reminiscent of the same art in the greatest of all masters of facts. And then it says in brackets, ex ungu Napoleon. Okay, I'm going to spell that for you. EXUNGUE, capital NAPOLEONEM. Okay, so, which is reminiscent of the same art in the greatest of all masters of facts. And last but not least, as an honest atheist, a specimen which is both rare and difficult to discover in France, all honor to Prosper Mérimée. M-E accent acute R-I-M-E accent acute E. Maybe that I am even envious of Stendhal. He robbed me of my best aesthetic joke, which I, of all people, could have perpetuated. Quote, God's only excuse is that he does not exist. End quote. I myself have said somewhere, what has been the greatest objection to life hitherto? God. And this is part 4 now. It was Heinrich Heine, who gave me the most perfect idea of what a lyrical poet could be. In vain do I search through all the kingdoms of antiquity or of modern times for anything to resemble his sweet and passionate music. He possessed that divine wickedness without which perfection itself becomes unthinkable to me. I estimate the value of men, of races, according to the extent to which they are unable to conceive of a God who has not a dash of the satyr in him, and with what mastery he wields his native tongue. One day it will be said that of Heine and me that we were by far the greatest artists of the German language that have ever existed, and that we left all the efforts and the mere Germans made in this language an incalculable distance behind us. I must be profoundly related to Byron's Manfred. Of all the dark abysses in his work, I found the counterparts in my own soul. At the age of 13, I was ripe for this book. Words fail me. I have only a look for those who dared to utter the name of Faust in the presence of Manfred. The Germans are incapable of conceiving anything sublime. For a proof of this, look at Schumann. Out of anger for this mawkish Saxon, I deliberately composed a counter-overture to Manfred, of which Hans von Bülow declared he had never seen the like before on paper. Such compositions amounted to a violation of Euterpe, Euterpe. When I cast about me for the highest formula of Shakespeare, I find invariably but this one, that he conceived the type of Caesar. Such things a man cannot guess. He either is the thing or he is not. The great poet draws his creation only from out of his own reality. This is so to such an extent that often after a lapse of time he can no longer endure his own work. After casting a glance between the pages of my Zarathustra, I pace the room to and fro for half an hour at a time, unable to overcome the insufferable fits of tears. I know of no more heartrending reading than Shakespeare. How a man must have suffered to be so in need of playing the clown. Is Hamlet understood? It is no doubt, but certitude that drives one mad. But in order to feel this, one must be profound. One must be an abyss, a philosopher. We all fear the truth. And, to make a confession, I feel instinctively certain and convinced that Lord Bacon is the originator, the self-torturer of this most sinister kind of literature. What do I care about the miserable gabble of American muddlers and the blockheads? But the power for the greatest realism in vision is not only compatible with the greatest realism in deeds, with the monstrous in deeds, with crime. It actually presupposes the latter. I'm going to read that sentence again. But the power for the greatest realism in vision is not only compatible with the greatest realism in deeds, with the monstrous in deeds, with crime. It actually presupposes the latter. We do not know half enough about Lord Bacon, the first realist in all the highest acceptation of his word. To be sure of everything he did, everything he willed, and everything he experienced in his inmost soul. Let the critics go to hell. Suppose I had christened my Zarathustra with a name not my own. Let's say with Richard Wagner's name. The acumen of 2,000 years would not have sufficed to guess that the author of Human, All Too Human, was the visionary of Zarathustra. Part 5. As I am speaking here of the recreations of my life, I feel I must express a word or two of gratitude for that which has refreshed me by far the more heartily and most profoundly. This, without the slightest doubt, was my intimate relationship with Richard Wagner. All my other relationships with men I treat quite lightly, but I would not have the days spent at Tribschen, Tribschen, those days of confidence, of cheerfulness, of sublime flashes, of profound moments, blotted from my life at any price. I know not what Wagner may have been for others, but no cloud ever darkened our sky. And this brings me back again to France. I have no arguments against Wagnerites, and hoc genus omne, HOCGENUSOMNE, who believe that they do honor to Wagner by believing him to be like themselves. For such people I have only contemptuous curl of my lip. With a nature like mine, which is so strange to everything Teutonic, and even to the presence of a German, retards my digestion. My first meeting with Wagner was the first moment in my life in which I breathed freely. I felt him. I honored him as a foreigner, as the opposite and the incarnate contradiction of all German virtues. We who as children breathed the marshy atmosphere of the 50s are necessarily pessimists in regard to the concept German. We cannot be anything else than revolutionaries. We can assent to no state of affairs which allows the canting bigot to be at the top. I care not a jot whether this canting bigot acts in different colors today, whether he dresses in scarlet or dons the uniform of a hussar, Hussar. Very well then, Wagner was a revolutionary. He fled from the Germans. As an artist, a man has no home in Europe save in Paris, and that subtlety of all the five senses which Wagner's art presupposes, those fingers that can detect slight gradations, psychological morbidity, all these things can only be found in Paris. Nowhere else can you meet with this passion for questions of form, this earnestness in matters of mise en sens, which in the Parisian earnestness par excellence. In Germany, no one has any idea of the tremendous ambition that fills the heart of a Parisian artist. The German is a good fellow. Wagner was by no means a good fellow, but I have already said quite enough on the subject of Wagner's real nature. Then it says in brackets, see Beyond Good and Evil, aphorism 269, close bracket, and about those to whom he most closely related. He is one of the late French romanticists, that high-soaring and heaven-aspiring band of artists like Delacroix and Berlioz, who in their inmost knackers are sick and incurable, and who are fanatics of expression and virtuosos through and through. Who, in sooth, was the first intelligent follower of Wagner? Charles Baudelaire, the very man who first understood Delacroix, that typical decadent in whom a whole generation of artists saw their reflection. He was perhaps the last of them, too. What is it that I have never forgiven Wagner? The fact that he condescended to the Germans, that he became a German imperialist. Wherever Germany spreads, she ruins culture. And this is part 6 now. Taking everything into consideration, I could never have survived my youth without Wagnerian music, for I was condemned to the society of Germans. If a man wished to get rid of a feeling of insufferable oppression, he has to take to hashish. Well, I had to take to Wagner. Wagner is the counter-poison to everything essentially German. The fact that he is poison too, I do not deny. From the moment that Tristan was arranged for the piano, all honor to you, Herr von Bülow. I was a Wagnerite. Wagner's previous works seemed beneath me. They were too commonplace, too German. But to this day, I'm still seeking for a work which would be a match to Tristan, to dangerous fascination, and possess some gruesome and dulcet quality of infinity. I seek among all the arts in vain. all the quaint features of Leonardo da Vinci's work lose their charm at the sound of the first bar in Tristan. This work is without question Wagner's non plus ultra. After its creation, the composition of the master singers and of the Ring was a relaxation to him. To become more healthy, to become more healthy, this, in a nature like Wagner's, amounts to going backwards. The curiosity of the psychologist is so great in me that I regard it as quite a special privilege to have lived at the right time and to have lived precisely among Germans in order to be ripe for this work. The world must indeed be empty for him who has never been unhealthy enough for this infernal voluptuousness. It is allowable and even imperative to employ a mystic formula for this purpose. I suppose I know better than anyone the prodigious feats of which Wagner was capable, the 50 worlds of strange ecstasies to which no one else had wings to soar. And as I am alive today, and strong enough to turn even the most suspicious and most dangerous things to my own advantage, and thus grow stronger, I declare Wagner to have been the greatest benefactor of my life. The bond which unites us is the fact that we have suffered greater agony even at each other's hands than most men are able to bear nowadays, and this will always keep our names associated in the minds of men. For just as Wagner is merely a misunderstanding among Germans, so in truth am I, and ever will be. Ye lack 2 centuries of psychological and artistic discipline, my dear countrymen. But ye can never recover the time lost. This is part 7. To the most exceptional of my readers, I should like to just say one word about what I really exact from music. It must be cheerful and yet profound, like an October afternoon. It must be original, exuberant, and tender, like a dainty, soft woman in roguishness and grace. I shall never admit that a German can understand what music is. Those musicians who are called German, the greatest and most famous foremost, are all foreigners, either Slavs, Croats, Italians, Dutchmen, or Jews, or else like Heinrich Schulz, Bach, and Handel. They are Germans of a strong race which is now extinct. For my own part, I still have enough of the Pole left in me to let all other music go, if only I can keep Chopin. For 3 reasons, I would accept Wagner's Siegfried Idyll, and perhaps also 1 or 2 things of Liszt, who excelled all other musicians in the noble tone of his orchestration. And finally, everything that has been produced beyond the Alps, this side of the Alps. I could not possibly dispense with Rossini, and still less with my southern soul and music, the work of my Venetian maestro, Pietro Gasti. And when I say beyond the Alps, all I really mean is Venice. If I try to find a new word for music, I can never find any other than Venice. I know not how to draw any distinction between tears and music. I do not know how to think either of joy or of the South without a shudder of fear. And this is a poem now. On the bridge I stood. Lately, In gloomy night came a distant song. In golden drops it rolled over the glittering rim away. Music, gondolas, lights. Drunk, swam far forth in the gloom. A stringed instrument, my soul, sang, imperceptibly moved. A gondola song by stealth, gleaming for gaudy blessedness. Hearkened any hitherto? And this is part 8 now. In all these things, in the choice of food, place, climate, and recreation, the instinct of self-preservation is dominant, and this instinct manifests itself with least ambiguity, when it acts as an instinct of defense. To close one's eyes too much, to seal one's ears too much, to keep certain things at a distance, this is the first principle of prudence, the first proof of the fact that a man is not an accident, but a necessity. The popular word for this instinct of defense is taste. A man's imperative command is not only to say no in cases where yes would be a sign of disinterestedness, but also to say no as seldom as possible. One must part with all that which compels one to repeat no with ever greater frequency. The rationale of this principle is that all discharges of defensive forces, however slight they may be, involve enormous and absolutely superfluous losses when they become regular and habitual. Our greatest expenditure of strength is made up of those small and most frequent discharges of it. The act of keeping things off, of holding them at a distance, amounts to a discharge of strength. Do not deceive yourselves on this point. And an expenditure of energy directed at purely negative ends, simply by being compelled to keep constantly on guard, a man may grow so weak as to be unable any longer to defend himself. Suppose I were to step out of my house, and instead of the quiet and aristocratic city of Turin, I were to find a German provincial town. My instinct would have to brace itself together in order to repel all that which would pour in upon it from this crushed down and cowardly world. Or suppose I were to find a large German city, that structure of vice in which nothing grows, but where every single thing, whether good or bad, is squeezed in from outside. In such circumstances, should I not be compelled to become a hedgehog? But to have prickles amounts to a squandering of the strength. They even constitute a twofold luxury when, if we only choose to do so, we could dispense with them and open our hands instead. Another form of prudence and self-defense consists in trying to react as seldom as possible and to keep oneself aloof from these circumstances and conditions wherein one would be condemned, as it were, to suspend one's liberty and one's initiative and become a mere reacting medium. As an example of this, I point to the intercourse with books. The scholar who, in sooth, does little else than handle books, with the philologist, and average attainments, their numbers may amount to 200 a day, ultimately forgets and completely the capacity of thinking for himself. When he has not a book between his fingers, he cannot think. When he thinks, he responds to a stimulus, a thought he has read. Finally, all he does is to react. The scholar exhausts his whole strength in saying either yes or no to matter which has already been thought out, or in criticizing it, he is no longer capable of thought on his own account. In him, the instinct of self-defense has decayed. Otherwise, he would defend himself against books. The scholar is a decadent. With his own eyes, I have seen gifted, richly endowed, and freely spirited natures already ready. No. Oh dear. I'm going to start the sentence again. With my own eyes, I have seen gifted, richly endowed, and freely spirited natures already read to ruins in quotes, at 30, and mere wax vestas that have to be rubbed before they can give off any sparks or thoughts. To set too early in the morning, at the break of day, in the fullness and dawn of one's strength, and to read a book, this I call positively vicious. And this is part 9 now. At this point, I can no longer evade a direct answer to the question, how one becomes what one is, and in giving it, I shall have to touch upon that masterpiece in the art of self-preservation, which is selfishness, granting that one's life task, the determination and the fate of one's life task, greatly exceeds the average measure of such things. Nothing more dangerous could be conceived than to come face to face with oneself by the side of this life task. The fact that one becomes what one is presupposes that one has not the remotest suspicion of what one is. From this standpoint, even the blunders of one's life have their own meaning and value, the temporary deviations and aberrations, the moments of hesitation and the modesty, the earnestness wasted upon duties which lie outside the actual life task. In these matters, great wisdom, perhaps even the highest wisdom, comes into activity. In these circumstances, in which nosce tipsum, Noscetipsum. Okay. In these circumstances in which nosce tipsum would be the sure road to ruin, forgetting oneself, misunderstanding oneself, belittling oneself, narrowing oneself, making oneself mediocre, amount to reason itself. Expressed morally, to love one's neighbor and to live for the others and for others may be the means of protection employed to maintain the hardest kind of egoism. I'm going to read this sentence again because this is important. Expressed morally, to love one's neighbor and to live for others and for other things may be the means of protection employed to maintain the hardest kind of egoism. This is the exceptional case in which I, contrary to my principle and conviction, take the side of the altruistic instincts, for here they are concerned with subserving selfishness and self-discipline. The whole surface of consciousness, for consciousness is a surface, must be kept free from any one of the great imperatives. Beware even of every striking word, of every striking attitude. They are all so many risks which the instinct runs of understanding itself too soon. They are all so many risks which the instinct runs of understanding itself too soon. Meanwhile, the organizing idea, which is destined to become master, grows and continues to grow into the depths, begins to command. It leads you slowly back from your deviations and aberrations. It prepares individual qualities and capacities which one day will make themselves felt as indispensable to the whole of your task. Step by step, it cultivates all the serviceable faculties before it even whispers a word concerning the dominant task, the goal, the object, and the meaning of it all. Looked at from this standpoint, my life is simply amazing. For the task of transvaluing values, more capacities were needful perhaps than could be well found side by side in one individual, and above all, antagonistic capacities which had to be freed from the mutual strife and destruction which they involve. An order of rank among capacities, distance, the art of separating without creating hostility, to refrain from confounding things, to keep from reconciling things, to possess enormous multifariousness and yet be the reverse of chaos. All this was the first condition, the long, secret work, and the artistic mastery of my instinct. Its superior guardianship manifested itself with such exceeding strength that not once did I ever dream what was growing within me until suddenly all my capacities were ripe and one day burst forth in all the perfection of their highest bloom. I cannot remember ever having exerted myself. I can point to no trace of struggle in my life. I am the reverse of a heroic nature. To will something, to strive after something, to have an aim or a desire in my mind. I know none of these things from experience. Even at the moment I look out upon my future, broad future, as upon a calm sea, no sigh of longing makes a ripple on its surface. I have not the slightest wish that anything should be otherwise than it is. I myself would not be otherwise. But in this matter, I have always been the same. I have never had a desire. A man who, after his 44th year, can say that he has never bothered himself about honors, women, or money, not that they did not come his way. It was thus that I became, one day, a university professor. I had never had the remotest idea of such a thing, for I was scarcely 24 years of age. In the same way, 2 years previously, I had one day become a philologist, in the sense that my first philological work, my start in every way, was expressly obtained by my master Ritschl, R-I-T-S-C-H-L, for publication in his Rheinischen Museum. Ritschl, and I say it in all reverence, was the only genial scholar that I have ever met. He possessed that pleasant kind of depravity which distinguishes us Thuringians and which makes even a German sympathetic. Even in the pursuit of truth, we prefer to avail ourselves of roundabout ways. In saying this, I do not mean to underestimate in any way my Thuringian brother, the the intelligent Leopold von Ranke, Ranke. And this is part 10 now. You may be wondering why I should actually have related all these trivial and, according to traditional accounts, insignificant details to you. Such action can but tell against me, more particularly if I am fated to figure in great causes. To this I replied that these trivial matters, diet, locality, climate, and one's mode of recreation, the whole casuistry of self-love, casuistry, Casuistry, self-love, are inconceivably more important than all that which has been hitherto held in high esteem. It is precisely in this quarter that we must begin to learn afresh. All these things which mankind has valued, which with such earnestness heretofore, are not even real. They are creations of fantasy, and more strictly speaking, lies born of the evil instincts of diseased and, in the deepest sense, noxious natures. All the concepts, God, soul, virtue, sin, beyond, truth, eternal life. But the greatest of human nature, but the greatness of human nature, its divinity in quotes, was sought for in them. But the greatness of human nature, its divinity, was sought for in them. All questions of politics, social order, education have been falsified, root and branch, owing to the fact that the most noxious men have been taken for great men, and that people were taught to despise the small things, or rather the fundamental things of life. If I now choose to compare myself with those creatures who have hitherto been honored as the first among men, the difference becomes obvious. I do not reckon the so-called first men even as human beings. For me, they are the excrements of mankind, the products of disease and of the instinct of revenge. They are so many monsters laden with rottenness, so many hopeless incurables who avenge themselves on life. I wish to be the opposite of these people. It is my privilege to have the very sharpest discernment for every sign of healthy instincts. There is no such thing as a morbid trait in me. Even in times of serious illness, I have never grown morbid, and you might seek in vain for a trace of fanaticism in my nature. No one can point to any moment in my life in which I have assumed either an arrogant or a pathetic attitude. Pathetic attitudes are not in keeping with greatness. He who needs attitudes is false. Beware of all picturesque men. Life was easy, in fact, easiest to me in those periods when it exacted the heaviest duties from me. Whoever could have seen me during the 70 days of this autumn, when, without interruption, I did a host of things of the highest rank, things that no man can do nowadays, with a sense of responsibility for all the ages to come, would have noticed no sign of tension in my condition, but rather a state of overflowing freshness and good cheer. Never have I eaten with more pleasant sensations. Never has my sleep been better. I know of no other manner of dealing with great tasks than as play. This, as a sign of greatness, is an essential prerequisite. the slightest constraint, a sober mien, any hard accent in the voice, all these things are objections to a man. But how much more to his work? One must not have nerves. Even to suffer from solitude is an objection. The only thing that I have suffered from is multitude. At an absurdly tender age, in fact, when I was 7 years old, I already knew that no human speech would ever reach me. Did anyone ever see me sad on that account? At present, I still possess the same affability towards everyone. I am even full of consideration for the lowest. In all this, there is not an atom of haughtiness or of secret contempt. He whom I despise soon guesses that he is despised by me. The very fact of my existence is enough to rouse indignation in all those who have polluted blood in their veins. My formula for greatness in man is amor fati, A-M-O-R-F-A-T-I. The fact that a man wishes nothing to be different, either in front of him or behind him, or for all eternity. Not only must the necessary be born, and on no account concealed, and idealism is falsehood in the face of necessity. I'm going to read that sentence again. Not only must the necessary be born, and on no account concealed, all idealism is falsehood in the face of necessity, but it must also be loved. Now here's a footnote. Oh, this concludes that chapter, by the way. But here's a footnote, and it says the German words are Einsamkeit and Vielsamkeit. The latter was coined by Nietzsche. The English word multitude should, therefore, be understood as signifying multivarious instincts and gifts, in which Nietzsche strove for ascendancy and caused him more suffering than any solitude. Complexity of this sort, held in check by a dominant instinct, as in Nietzsche's case, is of course the only possible basis of an artistic nature. The only possible basis of an artistic nature. Okay. So that concludes this chapter, and I'd just like to say a few words. And one of them is his writing, Nietzsche's writing, in my opinion, this is just my opinion, is multi-layered. Okay. So, I can understand, I could just speak for myself. I can understand it on some level, and on some level, I feel that it's eluding me. So whether I'm grasping the full understanding of what he's writing, I'm really not sure. So what I did after the last chapter, which I also read here, is I consulted with GPT to see if Chat could summarize that first chapter, that last chapter that I read, and just give me a brief summary that I could understand, like in simple English. And I'm going to read that to you now, so maybe this will enhance your understanding, or you can just ignore it. Up to you. And after this chapter, I will also consult with Chat and put that into the what they call the show notes under this, right? So you can look at it later, and see what you think. So here it is. This is from Chat GPT, and it's on the first chapter of Ecce Homo. and it's only 2 paragraphs, so it's not very long. In the first chapter of Ecce Homo, Nietzsche is essentially answering one big question: why did I turn out the way I did? He reflects on his health, his temperament, his isolation, and the long periods of illness that forced him inward. Rather than seeing suffering as something that ruined him, he treats it as something that trained him. Being sick slowed him down, made him more observant, and taught him how to listen to his own body and instincts. For Nietzsche, this wasn't weakness, it was preparation. What he's really saying in simple terms is that a meaningful life isn't about avoiding difficulty, but about learning how to use it. He believes each person has a unique path and rhythm, and trouble comes when we live according to someone else's values instead of our own nature. The first chapter sets this tone for the whole book. Nietzsche isn't trying to impress or confess. He's trying to show what it looks like to take full responsibility for who you are and to become yourself, even when the path there is uncomfortable or lonely. And I hope that helps you. It certainly helped me make sense of that first reading. And let me know if you like this little addition. I'll keep adding these to Nietzsche's chapters. And if you ignore it, then I'll ignore it too. Okay, till soon.